gentlemen, and welcome back to LMU Zoom-A-Palooza 2022. This is our first annual Zoom-A-Palooza event, and we're starting it this year in honor of LMU's 125th anniversary. So we have speakers coming from law and political science, public administration, and actually a lot of sort of poli-sci subfields, psychology, and religious studies. So hopefully this will be a thing that we can continue and maybe in the fall and the spring, and maybe even expand to a wider array of fields. But again, I am your event coordinator, Dr. Stephen Adkins. If you want to know more about this event or just our programs here at LMU, please visit us at lmunet.edu and find out all that you need to know there. So our first speaker is somebody that I know and I've known for a while now. It's been a long time. Is Logan Engle, and she is the Director of Planning and Economic Development for the city of Elizabethton, Tennessee. Logan holds a Master of Public Policy and Administration from the University of Tennessee and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and History from Carson-Newman University. Prior to beginning her role in Elizabethton, she previously worked for the city of Morristown and the town of Greenville. As a native of East Tennessee and Appalachia, Logan is passionate about the call to public service in this region, and she currently lives in Erwin, Tennessee, with her husband Tyler. So, Logan, it's been a while. We used to serve as teaching assistants together, I think, for Dr. Nouns or Dr. Gann. I'm not sure which, but it's good to see you, and we're excited to have you here. So I will hand the floor over to you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Adkins, I guess is the appropriate name to call you in this setting, right? Let me get my presentation started. Can you all see that? Thumbs up. That's good. Well, first of all, thank you all so much for taking your time to join us today to discuss a little bit about city planning. I am Logan Engle, and I appreciate your time today. I also appreciate the invitation to come and speak to you all about a little bit about what it is that I do in terms of city planning. I'll go ahead and preface and say, when I tell most people that I'm a planner, they think I'm an event planner because that's the nomenclature that we so often hear when we think of planning. I will say that is not at all what I do. So if any of you all are misled by that, we'll go ahead and get started there. That is not what I do as a city planner. But today I want to talk to you a little bit about quality of place, specifically in rural Appalachia, because that's the area in which I have had most of my experience. I was raised in Jefferson County. I worked in Hamlin County, Greene County, and now I work in Carter County in Northeast Tennessee. I live in Unicoi County. So rural Appalachia is really what I know. It's a part of my heritage. It's a part of my experience, and it's a part of my chosen profession in working in public service in this region. I look forward to sharing with you a little bit more about that. In order to understand really how we can achieve a high quality of place in rural Appalachian communities, it's important to lay some groundwork about what it is that planning is. And two terms that you often hear when you consider the discipline of land use or planning in general is the term planning, but also the term zoning. And those two terms are hard to distinguish, but they're important for our purpose of discussion today because they dictate how we get a good, high quality of place in our community. So we'll start with some definitions. What is planning? Planning is defined as the process of making plans for something. That seems obvious, right? That if we engage in the act of planning, we're engaged in the process of making plans for something. And when we consider planning cities, we have certain values that are important to us. And we really have to involve everyone in that process. Everyone can be defined differently based upon the community that you're in. various stakeholders. That might include land developers. It might include farmers if you're in a really rural, agriculturally centered economy. It might include city staff, people that look like me, or elected officials who have been elected to represent folks in community. It could be nonprofits. It could be just general citizens, utility providers. Really, the sky is the limit when we consider those stakeholders that we have to talk to in order to better plan and understand the vision and the value systems for our communities.
Hey, Logan, I want to pause you for a second. You're in presenter mode, so we can actually see 2 slides. We're a slide ahead.
Okay, let's see if we can fix that. I'm seeing both, but you're seeing.
Yeah, we see both. We see both as well. Yeah, our previous.
Do you have any tips as to how perhaps we could?
Let's see.
How about that?
Yeah.
That fix it?
Yeah, there we go. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you all. So when we consider planning, this quote, I think, is a good one. It says, if you plan cities for cars and traffic, you get cars and traffic. If you plan for people and places, you get people and places. So what you're putting into the process of what you're planning is hopefully what you're going to get out. So if you're just simply considering, at least in this case, cars and traffic, when you consider your city, if those are the only values that you're considering, that's what you're going to get. But if you plan for people, if you plan for places, if you consider really what the perspectives of the community are, you're going to get those kinds of outcomes. So it's very easy for us who work in government, or maybe some of you may find yourself in that position one day. It's very easy for us to get down in the weeds of the technical aspects of our job. But it's always important for us to remember that we don't do this just to advance a process. Because we've always done it that way, or that's what the law perhaps requires. It's not that those things aren't important, but at the end of the day, we're here serving in a community because of the people in the community and the value systems that they've put in place throughout the history of our community. So what is urban planning? Urban planning is city planning. And this is where it gets a little more interesting for us as practitioners, because this is where we get to use our technical skills and also our political skills. City planning is not purely technical on a page. There are political implications. And if we want to have success, we have to understand that those are both sides of the same coin. They don't operate in a vacuum without the other. And it involves the use of land, the environment, transportation, infrastructure, recreational facilities, etc. One thing that I appreciate about planning, and I can look back at my career and I can look back at my time in school and see that I always was inclined to the interdisciplinary. I was interested by many different types of fields and always sort of considered myself a jack of all trades, master of none kind of person. And so to have landed in this field has really been good for me. Because I'm able to touch a lot of different disciplines and know just enough about each one to be dangerous. So who are the types of groups that we work with? What kinds of stakeholders are we engaging in? Well, here at the city, we're talking to police, fire, EMS, so law enforcement and emergency services. We don't think about it, but if you build a cul-de-sac in a subdivision, don't you want to make sure that a fire truck can adequately turn in that cul-de-sac in order to get out of that situation to get to another emergency? That's part of planning, and that's part of what we do. We work with school systems. We work with public works departments, streets departments, in order to ensure that the infrastructure that may be placed is adequately served and can be well maintained. We work with utilities. Traditionally, that's water, sewer, electric power, natural gas. But in our economy today, we're finding that really broadband is a new utility. It's being considered as a new utility. It's essential to what we're doing here today in order to host events like this. And it's playing a role in our society that we have to elevate it to the same level that we would give sanitary sewer or water service. We work with engineering, road designers, people who are engaged in ensuring that the infrastructure that we put in is adequately sized and is safe and appropriate for our community. We work with folks that deal with stormwater, How do we carry stormwater from one place to the other in order to ensure that our communities are environmentally sound and sustainable? So it is truly an interdisciplinary perspective. And so if that's something that you find yourself in that role, perhaps city planning could be a good place for you to land too. But ultimately, our goal is to go from a community on the left, which you see in this image. You've got broken out windows, toxic fumes, things that don't look very attractive for a community. We want to move to communities that look like the community on the right. Places that we would want to live, places that are welcoming, places that are inviting, places that feel like home. And I think that's what we're trying to promote. But that doesn't look the same for everyone. So if you will bear with me, I've got a very brief, very non-technical case study here. But this is New York City. You may have been to New York City. It's densely packed, has a lot of very tall buildings. It's built for traffic, but obviously not very well because there's always traffic problems in New York City. It's built for pedestrians. It's built for public transit. It's a community that has particular needs based upon its population, and as such has developed in a particular way to make it look like the New York City that we know. And you could put any large city, any urban center in this case study and see that they all have very similar experiences when you visit them. They have similar looks, similar feels, similar styles. And that's all been developed by the diversity of the community, what the needs are based upon the development, based upon the people. But let's move to a community that looks maybe a little bit different than New York City, and that's Erwin, Tennessee. It was mentioned, this is where I live. That doesn't really look like New York City, does it? It's very different. It's not very dense. There's no smog or toxic fumes. There are mountains. It's small town, rural America. It looks very different. Well, why? Well, those are the needs of the community. It wouldn't make sense for the Empire State Building to be in downtown Erwin. There isn't a need for that. That's not the community's value set. The community's value set looks very different based upon the culture and based upon the people and based upon how the city has developed due to industry or business or whatever has occurred in the community. So it looks very different. So this is a good reminder for us that every community is different. They have different needs. They plan differently. What works in New York City is probably not going to work in Erwin. What works in Erwin is definitely probably not going to work in New York City. So we have to consider the community's character, and that character is developed, again, by the value system of the community itself. Just as an example, these are 8 pictures of communities in Upper East Tennessee. The top left, we have Bristol. The second picture on the top is Elizabethton. So I'm going to highlight that one. You see our beautiful covered bridge, the Watauga and the Doe Rivers, beautiful mountains. That's where I'm sitting today. I'm just about a block from the covered bridge. Erwin, Greenville, moving down to the bottom left, that's Johnson City. Kingsport, Mountain City, which is in Little Johnson County, and Jonesboro. So these are all downtowns in our region, but they all look very different. They have different architectural styles. They have different characters. Well, how has that developed? The nature and the character of the community. So even in this particular region, within an hour, I can be to any of these communities within an hour. We have very different feels, very different looks, very different styles. And that helps us to understand better what the community's values are. So the second question I posed in planning versus zoning, what is zoning? Zoning is a tool. You can look at it as the hammer, if you want to look at it as being an enforcement measure, or maybe a wrench, if you want to look at it as a tool that helps us get somewhere. But zoning is a tool in our toolbox as planners, as cities, as counties, that we can use to regulate land use and development. And so we use this tool, this sort of regulatory tool. You may have heard of a zoning ordinance or a zoning law or a zoning code. That's just basically a compilation of various regulations that we put into place to help dictate what we want our community to look like. So that helps to shape our neighborhoods. It helps to shape our buildings. It helps to shape how our communities look like, both in our downtown cores or our suburban edges. So based upon those regulations, the communities look very different. Each of these have their own different types of regulations. So it helps to shape our community. And every community's tool looks a little bit different. Zoning can regulate many different things. Perhaps it's different types of uses. Maybe it's how small can you get lots in a particular zone. We're going to talk a little bit about current trends in development. One of the things we're seeing, at least this part of the country, and I think we're seeing it nationwide, is an increased density, specifically in residential developments, where we're trying to pack in more residential units in a smaller land area. So maybe we regulate that through zoning. Maybe we regulate building setbacks. How close can you build to a property line? How many parking spaces do you need for a bank, for a doctor's office, for a big box store, for a hair salon? We regulate driveways and traffic geometrics. How wide does the radius need to be when you turn into a driveway off of a main road? We regulate development in the floodplain. We want to make sure that communities are safe, that you don't just build your house in the middle of a place that we know is going to flood. We regulate telecommunications towers, cell towers. Do you want a 200-foot cell tower next to your house? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. We regulate signs, which, believe it or not, really dictate how a community looks, especially to someone visiting your community. We regulate lighting, we regulate landscaping. There's a lot of regulation, which, as I'm going to mention, sometimes creates an imbalance for us when we work in government. But at the end of the day, what we put in that zoning ordinance is a tool to help us implement the plans that we seek. So when we look at planning and zoning, planning sets the goal, it sets the vision. Zoning is the process and the means by which we implement that vision. So they should work in tandem with one another if we're doing what we're supposed to do. But there's a problem in how people respond to government. By nature, we don't like to be told what to do, right? And in rural Appalachia, let me just tell you, people really don't like to be told what to do. That independent streak is a part of our culture. It's a part of our heritage. It's how we made it over the mountains to begin with, to seek new land and be pioneering in our spirit, and how we develop our community and our culture. And here in Elizabethton, we actually have the Watauga Association, which was the first independent government west of the mountains. So we have some really independent people who came here specifically to found a new way of living. It's actually celebrating its 250th anniversary this year. So if you like history, it's very interesting. You can talk to me later and I can let you know more about that. So we're going to go way back beyond the pioneers who came across the Appalachian Mountains to some well-known English political philosophers. So if you are a political science major, or you have had American political thought, or you've taken any type of political science course, I don't know how you might have escaped that without learning about these two men. And the first of those is Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes said that people are naturally quarrelsome. It's in their nature to want to rebel. And of course, we get this line that people are nasty, brutish, and short. They're short-tempered in their nature, just generally. And he felt like the best type of government is the one that has absolute authority and power over people. Of course, this helps to prop up the idea of a monarchy. So it was very convenient for the time that he was writing this and in the place that he was writing it. But he also posits that the only reason people behave is because society forces them to stay in line. So that's why we need government. We need government to keep people who are acting out of difficult interests, to get them to stay in line. And I don't like to think people are like this, but then sometimes in my day-to-day job, I find out some people are. And so it is challenging. The second of these philosophers, which I think is the one we like to feel like that we're embracing here in America, is John Locke. And he does admit life is difficult when we live in a state of nature, when we don't have rules, when we don't have regulations, when we're just out doing our own thing. And we are endowed with natural rights as human beings. But in a state of nature, our rights are not protected. So of course, Locke says we create government to protect our natural rights. And sometimes when I'm doing my day-to-day job, it's hard for me to remember that at the end of the day, every human has rights. And they have rights in regard to the planning and zoning process. And so we have to remember that. And some of these rights, I was reading on a United States government webpage. It's a page where if you want to become a citizen of the United States, you might go to read about becoming a citizen. What is that process? And on that webpage, they lay out the rights of a U.S. citizen. They say you have the freedom to express yourself, to worship as you wish, to a prompt fair trial by jury, to vote in elections for public officials, to apply for federal employment requiring U.S. citizenship, to run for elected office, and of course, the freedom to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which we should all be aware of. But that's not really the kind of right that we're dealing with in our office every day. Those are important, don't get me wrong, but we're primarily looking at our private property rights. So we're considering the balance that takes place between the right to hold property, to use property in a way that you want to use it, but then also the understanding that although you've been given this natural right, in order to work better together as a community, we have to have government to regulate that. And of course, that's a police power. It's been derived from the police power in the Bill of Rights. I don't like to use that word in my everyday work, police, because we like to think of ourselves as good guys in our office, not as the police or not as someone that is coming down hard on someone, although sometimes people feel that way. But property rights might include the right to use the good. So if you own a piece of property, you have the right to use it how you see fit within the limits of the regulation. You might have the right to earn income from the good. Maybe that's leasing it, renting it out. But that doesn't mean that there aren't regulations that might dictate the manner by which you do that. The right to transfer the good to others, sell it, give it away, abandon it, which, believe it or not, happens all the time. People leave vacant property and they leave it and it sits and then it becomes a public nuisance and we have to deal with that. So within limits, you have the right to abandon it within limits or destroy it. Maybe you want to demolish it. You have the right to do that within limits. You might have to get a permit to demolish it. So we're constantly in this power struggle of limits. So that always reminds me of the Eagles song, Take It to the Limit. And unfortunately, that's what people want to do. They want to, it sometimes feels like push the limits of that balance. And oftentimes they feel like this. They feel like Uncle Sam's big, long arm of government is coming down upon them. And they're just trying to build a house, or they're just trying to rent their property, or they're just trying to put that big billboard in their front yard and they don't understand why they can't do that. Whatever it may be, they feel like this guy. They're protecting their property and they feel like government has come and is infringing upon their property right. So we always have to be cognizant of the balance that takes place here, that there is a balance between a person's private property rights and the limits to which those rights exist, and the limit to which we can impose a regulation on their right. This is how it feels when you're trying to practice that every day. It's like you're trying to balance a bunch of plates and keep them from falling off as they're spinning around. As a staff member, that's what it feels like. As a council member or an elected official, sometimes it can feel that way. Because guess what? We don't all agree about where those limits are. We don't all feel the same way about where those limits should fall and where your private property right and the right of government to control what you do on your property exists. So we're constantly in this friction between those two things. And so staff gets to encounter that on a daily basis as we try to work out solutions to problems. But ultimately, where your community falls in that balance is based upon its value system. It's based upon its plan. It's based upon the tools that you implement. And you implement those tools for a reason. You implement those ordinances for a reason because you have a vision for where you want your community to go. And it's very easy to capitulate to that person's need or that desire to have that right. So we're constantly in friction as we work with our elected officials and as we work with the public to achieve that balance, to make sure that we are creating communities that really showcase the vision that has been made as we plan. So how do we try to achieve that balance? Well, as the public is involved, what we try to do is the right thing, the right legal thing, and that's focus on due process. That regardless of your background, regardless of where you come from, if you own land, if you don't, if you rent, if you just are driving through town and happen upon the public meeting when it's happening, you have the right to due process. You have the right to be heard. And so we hold meetings. We hold a lot of meetings. If you ever watched the sitcom Parks and Recreation, you are aware of the public forum. Yes, it is really like that. People ask me that all the time. That's exactly what it's like. I don't know if the people who consulted for that show ever worked in government, but they talked to someone who had that experience. So we hold public meetings. We consider development plans. We offer opportunities for public hearing so we can hear what the public has to say. Is this in line with the vision of the community? And then we stack those things up against the plan. We stack those things up against the plan that has been set as policy for the community. And we look to see how closely those things align. Unfortunately, they don't always align. And then we get this situation, the angry citizen. If you've ever worked in government, you know this scene. It happens. You see it on TV. If you don't, it happens. People get very angry. They get upset when they feel like that their personal vision and the community's vision don't align. But we still have to give those people a right to speak their mind within limits. Maybe we do that through limiting the time they're allowed to speak. Maybe we do that by limiting the number of people who are allowed to speak. So there are limits to that, but we have to understand that every perspective is valuable to the process, and we have to hear those perspectives. I mentioned Parks and Recreation. Leslie Nope said, what I hear when I'm being yelled at is people caring really loudly at me. So as government officials, sometimes this is what it is. We have to realize that some people are just going to be upset, but their anger is sometimes born from passion, that they really do care about their communities. And so we have to understand that as we do our jobs day to day. Ultimately, the plans we make, carried out through policies, regulations that our elected officials set, help to dictate the types of communities we live in. I've said that before in this presentation. How it looks, how it feels, how safe it is, really what type of place is it? And that is really what helps to form a quality of place. If you look at this picture of this residential subdivision, you can probably guess that one of the things that this community values is sidewalks. If you want to see how well a community respects pedestrians, go to their new residential subdivisions and see if they have sidewalks. This community has that. They value that in their community. A lot of communities don't. They may value trees. You see there are trees all along the street. They want to increase the green canopy of their community. They value order, it seems, because everything seems to be very ordered. Similar setbacks from property lines, from streets. They value wide streets. It looks like they value interconnectivity because you don't see a lot of cul-de-sacs that end in dead ends. You see streets that connect to one another, and in order to ensure that people have good access from place to place. On the other hand, we have this community. This community values disorder, or maybe they don't really know what they value. So they don't have a plan and they don't have regulations to help dictate what it looks like. You see houses are stacked on top of each other. Driveways are built on top of each other. People are living on top of each other. Maybe they don't have a good plan. Maybe they don't have tools that help to guide their development process. Or maybe this is the kind of community they want. It's hard for maybe me to understand, but maybe this really does reflect their values. Maybe they want to live on top of each other. It's just a very different type of community. Of course, this is just another example of that. We have the subdivision on the left, cul-de-sacs. It's hard to get from place to place. Subdivision on the right, you can get from place to place. They value transportation. They value connectivity. And of course, as I said, we have a big book. Every community I would urge you or ask you or recommend to you that wherever you live, Google your community's name, zoning ordinance. See if you can find that, read through it. You'll probably be surprised about the types of regulations that are in there, how detailed they are in terms of what they regulate. Everything from, as I said, number of parking spaces, the required size of the parking space, number of street lights, and then go drive around your community and see if you can find those regulations lived out in the developments that are there. I want to give you all an example of a rural Appalachian community that maybe did not do this very well. So we're going to call this a cautionary tale. This is McDowell County, West Virginia. These pictures were taken in the 20s, 30s, 1920s, 1930s. Of course, at that time, McDowell County, West Virginia, was known for coal. That was their primary industry for many years. We know most of Appalachia had coal as a primary industry. And so because of this, they built their community for coal. This is McDowell County, West Virginia. This is the downtown in their community. It's hard to believe, but in the 20s, only 3 American communities sold Chanel No. 5 perfume. New York, 3 communities in the world: New York, Paris, and McDowell County, West Virginia. The amount of wealth in McDowell County was just unimaginable because of the coal industry. So they built a community that was a testament to the coal industry. The population exploded to well over 100,000. This picture is in Welch, which is their county seat. Today, fewer than 20,000 people live in McDowell County. They planned their community around an industry. The industry left, and what were they left with? A community that's really facing some pretty significant infrastructure challenges. Growth might have not been incremental, and as a result, there was a very large explosion of people. But I can say with certainty, when the coal industry left, the community declined very rapidly. Just as the boom had begun, the decline began as well, and it was a very rapid shift. So as a result, this is the community now, and you can, read in the Washington Post or the New York Times about this community. It's been written about many, many times over the years, and it's a testament to what the community valued. They valued the industry that was there, but perhaps they didn't consider what happened when the industry left. So it's really time for us in rural Appalachia to shift gears. It's very easy for us in Appalachia to remember the past. This is in Kingsport, J. Fred Johnson department store. That building is still there, but it's vacant. It doesn't look like that anymore. This is downtown, Johnson City. Doesn't look like that anymore. I'm not saying it's not vibrant, but it doesn't look like that. Then we get cars. Doesn't quite look like that either. So now we have to figure out, who are we? What are our values? They've changed. If we're always looking back to what was, we can't focus on what is and what can be. So here's a few pictures of our community now. We have a great outdoor recreation community in Northeast Tennessee. We have kayaking, fly fishing, mountain biking. We've pivoted who we are as a community, recognizing that we can't necessarily only rely on the industries that have been here over the years. And we have to focus on community development. We have to create a quality of place. The other hat that I wear is economic development. People don't understand how important quality of place is to industry when they locate in a community, but it is. They want to know about their schools. They want to know about outdoor recreation. They want to know about what their folks are going to do. How am I going to attract employees to come and work in my community? And so all of these things play a part in our quality of place here in this region. So what do we do? What do we do about that? We have to understand current trends, and we have to plan. We have to read the tea leaves really before they get here. And here in this region, what that looks like is massive growth. We are seeing a great influx and migration of people from other parts of the country. More people moved to Tennessee than any other state in 2020, according to U-Haul's migration data, making it the #1 growth state in the nation. We also can track this through pods, those little pod trailers you can rent. Johnson City, Tennessee was the #2 pod rental area in the country in 2020. People are moving here because they say, I'm tired of being taxed in other communities. I'm tired of a high cost of living, and I want to come to a new place. Well, what does this mean? It means home sales and land development is rapidly growing. You can see here, if you own your own home in 2020, your home was worth on average $170,000. Today, $256,000. That's massive growth in just a couple of years since the pandemic began. We're also seeing lots of new construction. We're in the Tri-Cities area, in the Appalachian Highlands region. We're seeing our best years for new home permits in over a decade. And we are seeing some of the best growth rates we've seen even longer. Lots of communities, lots of substantial increase in high-end home permits, $500,000 and up homes. So we're seeing a lot of new homes being built. We're also seeing a tightening labor market. There are fewer workers, but there are also fewer jobs. Unemployment rates have dropped to historical lows. If you are hiring, you don't have to drive around to see lots of now hiring signs. You can find those very quickly. And what that's doing is driving the cost of wages up. So that plays a role in how our communities grow and develop. And then I mentioned this, we're seeing density, more homes, less yard. Maybe traditionally you had one single family detached 3,000 square foot home. Maybe it's a 2-story home, probably got a garage or a basement. In that same space, perhaps you can build 3 townhomes or 6 condominiums. And of course, developers like this because they're making more money, but it's also fulfilling a significant housing shortfall need. At least in my part of the state, we don't have enough housing units. We've got more people moving here than we have available housing. So we're seeing more development that looks like this rather than looks like that. That sort of traditional agricultural 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 square foot estate lot. It's shifting what our communities look like. So if you want a high quality of place, what do? Well, if you are a government official, engage the community. Understand who is in your community. Understand that's going to shift based upon some of these trends that I mentioned. If you're a citizen, get involved, because if you're in a good community, people who are working in government are looking for feedback. But if you don't give it, they don't know your perspective. On both sides of that coin, understand that you're going to receive a diversity of perspectives, and you have to figure out how you're going to balance those perspectives and set goals to plan for the type of community you want based on those values and perspectives. You need to understand that trends are really reality. Things are coming, whether you're ready for them or not, and those external factors are going to affect your work. They're going to affect your community, and know your community's personality. New York City is not Irwin, Tennessee. Elizabethton is not Knoxville. So we have to understand our community to understand what it needs to look like, what it's going to look like, and really what is attainable for us as we determine quality of place. So with that, that's what I have as far as presentation is concerned. And so I would be welcome to open it up for questions.
Yeah, so if you have any questions, please share those either in the Q&A box, or you can share those in the chat box. And we have one question right now, and maybe you can speak to this. The question is, Jonesboro is so different than other cities due to its history. Was that history and origin used in development and zoning of the community, the buildings, etc.?
Great question. I don't care to answer that, and hopefully no one here is from Jonesboro and you won't criticize me for speaking on their behalf. Jonesboro is unique. If you don't know, Jonesboro is considered to be the oldest town in Tennessee. And so because of that unique history and heritage, their community looks a lot different than a lot of other communities in the region. They are very diligent and vigilant about historic preservation and zoning. So because that's important to them as a community, they brand themselves as the first city in Tennessee. That's very important for them as an identity. And so that history and culture is reflected in the way that they utilize historic zoning. They have a very active historic zoning commission that probably in this region is the one that we would all look to as a model. But they can only do that in their community because the community values that. That's why it's still there. If their community hadn't valued it, those buildings would have been torn down long ago. So the preservation aspect is very important. And so to that question, I appreciate that question, because that's a great example of how you can see a community's values really borne out in what they do and how they develop. And as they have had some infill development in downtown, they're very careful about the aesthetic and the appearance because they want to maintain that historic character of the community.
All right, we've got another question here. It says, what are the challenges and solutions to making Appalachian cities more pedestrian and bike friendly if communities see this as a problem?
Well, I will start with challenges because you asked that part first, but I think challenges are always easier to identify than solutions. I think one of the challenges is just getting people out of the car mindset, which we are so prone to in this part of the country. I think also other challenges are topography, at least in this part of the state and in Appalachia in general. You know, we're dealing with a lot of varied topography, a lot of mountainous terrain, hills and valleys, and sometimes it's hard. Sometimes, say it's a state route, there's only enough room for the road, much less a bike lane. But unfortunately, those scenic routes are where most people want to cycle. So that poses a little bit of friction and a little bit of a challenge. So, you know, we have seen the Tennessee Department of Transportation really emphasize alternative transportation programs and projects, including pedestrian and bike friendly projects. I will say solutions. So here in Elizabethton, we're really blessed with a lot of pedestrian and bike facilities due to careful planning. So it can be done. We have the Tweetsy Trail, which runs from downtown Johnson City through downtown Elizabethton. It's about a 10-mile bike ped trail. And it's in an old railroad right-of-way bed that the city of Johnson City and the city of Elizabethton have coordinated on in order to develop. And so that's a great asset in our community. It also links two communities who are pretty close to one another. So we can have some regionalism in how we interact with one another and work more closely together. So it can be done here in Elizabethton. We also have a linear trail that runs along the riverfront. Typically what we see, and in my experience, is a lot of times rural Appalachian communities don't have the resources to fund that on their own. So those programs that can be provided through the State Department of Transportation to help with planning of those kinds of projects, and then also engineering and construction are pretty vital. Those encumber the project a little bit more because it takes longer to sometimes accomplish those when you have to break it up into little chunks, because we aren't as blessed with the resources as some of our urban neighbors, but it allows the projects to be completed. And then you have a community asset that you can really laud in your community. So just in our community, we have those two ped bike paths. And I feel like we've done a pretty good job over the past 20 years to implement those. They're not complete, but there's room to complete those, and there's room for growth.
We have a question here. It says, I lived in Johnson City for many years, and I always loved the way the roads were designed. There were numerous ways to go any location in case one was blocked. Was that included in the design?
You know, I don't know. Probably. I will tell my friends in Johnson City that you said that, because they will appreciate that. There are a lot of bypass roads in Johnson City that seem to help move traffic pretty easily. I never found myself in traffic much in Johnson City. And so I would imagine, yes, that was a part of the design in the interest to alleviate traffic. We're actually a part of in Elizabethton, a Johnson City Metropolitan Transit Planning Organization. And so that transit planning entity, Knoxville has a similar entity. All the metro cities in the state have those, helps to kind of set transportation priorities and find problems and alleviate them. And so their work is shown by how easy it is to drive and commute in a community. And so I'll certainly pass along that positive word that it's being felt when people are driving around the community.
Okay. Next question is there ever a time when you see community values perpetuating easily solved inequalities or hardships? For example, opposition to zoning that creates more affordable housing. And if so, how do you weigh community values with planning best practices in situations like that?
Yes, is the answer to the first part of that question. Uh, you know, you can watch planning commission meetings. If you're a nerd like me, sometimes you go and you watch other people's planning commission meetings. That is one silver lining of COVID, is we're seeing many more public meetings being live streamed or recorded and then shared later on YouTube or on city websites and things like that. There are a list of things that we often hear related to development. So you mentioned more affordable housing. A lot of times more affordable housing is generally more dense in nature. Maybe it's multifamily type housing. Maybe it's, starter homes that are sort of packed more densely in a neighborhood. And some people are really resistant to people. And it's not that they're really resistant to the development. The sad reality is some people are just resistant to people they don't know because the people don't look like them. They don't shop at the places they shop. They don't dress the way they dress. They don't look the way that they look. They don't speak the same language that they look. And, that's a harsh reality of our culture and something we have to grapple with. Maybe they have more kids than they want them to have. There are a lot of reasons that people give. But ultimately, it's because they're resistant to change, right? So they're just not comfortable with something different than what they've always been used to. How do you weigh values with planning best practices? I think as staff, you have to recognize that your role is to make a recommendation, really to make a technical recommendation. And you have an ethic, really, a personal ethic and a professional ethic to do what's right. And sometimes that's in the face of political pressure. And sometimes that's in the face of angry people that look like that yelling guy on my slide a little bit ago. But ultimately, that's your responsibility. So if politics gets in the way of that, because maybe your planning commission or your board of zoning appeals or your city council or county commission can't reconcile those values and the inequalities, then it's a really hard place to be, but you have to let the political process bear that out and do the best job that you can as staff to, really provide good technical skill and good adequate answers that are going to make people understand that it's really just emotion. It's people just really being upset because they don't want to see something different than what they're used to. But if you can get your councils and your commissions and your boards past that, then you can probably propel the development forward in spite of the conflict.
So another question, and this is coming largely from me, is you mentioned early in your presentation that people are resistant. They've got an independent streak when they're thinking about government action. So that's sort of describing the relationship between citizen and the government. But do you see situations, or are you involved in situations where members of your community are resistant to maybe a plan or a change because they view it as someone coming from outside of the community, that this is an outsider and they're coming from the big city? Do you ever have problems like that?
Well, I don't live in the community I serve, so yes. And I have never been from or lived in the community in which I've served. So sometimes there can be resistance to that because you are perceived as an outsider. The beauty, and I always say this, is I can pass as a Carter Countyan because I sound like one. I may not, so I can get by with a little bit of that, but I see it in other interactions. Some communities I have served in are very resistant to outside development. If it's our own people doing it, we trust them because we know them. We went to high school with them. We babysat their kids. We were on Little League together, whatever it is. There's that trust that comes from that. But then in other communities, I've seen the opposite. I always say any expert with a briefcase from the next town over can sometimes have a bigger impact than I can. So an outside expert can sometimes get people out of their closed thinking, out of that silo of just doing things the way we've always done them. I might tell them the exact same thing that that outside expert tells them, but because it's coming from someone that is trusted, it seems to help. So I've seen both sides of that. And it's interesting. It's hard to predict which way people are going to go.
Do you ever have the opportunity to network with other planners in this region, or even planners from other parts of the country? And are there plans and tactics, strategies that you're able to borrow from other parts of the country?
Sure. Here in the state of Tennessee, we have TAPA, which is the Tennessee chapter of the American Planning Association. We have regional sections, and our section is the state of Franklin section. If you don't know what the state of Franklin is, Google that, because we're very proud of that here in this part of the state. And it also speaks to our independence. And so I'm the section director for that group, and we actually met on Friday. So we have a very strong professional network, particularly in Northeast Tennessee. And there are a few different reasons for that, but we have a very robust networking group. And then nationally, we have the American Planning Association. And if you're a member of that organization, you have access to a lot of materials, current publications, technical advice that comes from some of the best planning minds in the country. I actually was just reading before our presentation some 2022's trends to know about for planners. And so, it's a great way to get better connected to the profession. Although I will say, as I said, New York City is not Irwin. So some of the things that you read as a rural planner of a small Appalachian community are just not relevant, but you can pick and choose the nuggets and things that work. And the things that work for me are probably not going to work for somebody in Chicago or Atlanta.
Can you speak a little bit about how you got into being a city planner? Is this something that when you were getting your master's or even your undergraduate degree, were you thinking about it then, or was this just something that was available? And then maybe also talk about careers in this path. Is this sort of like, do you have longer term aspirations to be a city planner in New York City, larger markets, or how does that work for people that are in the planning profession?
Well, for me personally, of course, as you mentioned in my introduction, my undergraduate degree is in political science and history. Of course, how we met was at UT. I was actually in the doctoral program at the time, or master's program, with the intent to get my doctoral degree to maybe teach. And I fell into a public administration seminar, and that led to a change in program to the Master's of Public Policy and Administration at UT. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with that, other than I knew I wanted to work in local government because I felt like I could make an impact in my community, in the region that I lived in. And I feel very passionate about working in Appalachia. I don't really ever see myself leaving Appalachia, but planning was not necessarily something that I thought that I would be getting into when I got my MPPA degree. So when I was applying for jobs out of graduate school, this is just where I fit. And it was actually well suited because I've always sort of been a planner in terms of being an organized, disciplined type of person. And so it was a really good fit. I also had that range, that interdisciplinary kind of nature in me. And so it was a great fit. But I never took a course in planning at UT or anywhere. So don't think just because you didn't take technical courses in planning means you can't do it. Because I've been doing it for nearly a decade now. And on the job training is very valuable. So you need the knowledge that you need to do the job, but sometimes you don't know the things you need to know until you're actually doing it, and then you learn them. So some things trial by fire. You just have to get in there and roll your sleeves up and do it. So lots of on-the-job training with this job. There are programs, master's programs, that are specifically geared to city planning. The only one in the state of Tennessee is at the University of Memphis. It's the only one that's out there in the state, but there are others. ETSU here in Johnson City has an MPA program with an emphasis in planning and development. So, but you don't have to be in a very specifically geared program to do it. As far as opportunities go, a lot of municipalities, lots of counties have planning staff. There's a lot of opportunities. Actually, there's a lot of job openings in planning right now. So if it's something that you're interested in as a student, let me know, and maybe I can assist you with that. But for me, I want to stay in this particular area. But if you're not tied to Appalachia, if you don't have a passion or a heart for public service in Appalachia, you can certainly go anywhere in the country and use these types of skills in order to affect quality of place in communities.
So related to training and learning on the job, if there was something that you could go back in time 10 years back to when you started this position, what would you tell yourself that you need to know, or you need to at least beef up on to be better at your position?
People are challenging. That's not specific to planning, but people are challenging. This is a people business. So if you are not geared toward dealing with people, public service is probably not for you. We talk about like the public service motivation. That's real. That's not just something that's in a textbook. I can tell you because I have it, and I can tell you because I know other people who've tried to have it and they just don't. They're motivated by something very different, and that's okay. It may not be for you, but people, it comes down to people. You have to be able to work with people. You have to be able to serve people regardless of where they come from, who they are, how much they have in their bank account, what language they speak. You just never know what kind of encounter you're going to find yourself in. And so you have to treat people with dignity and understand that they can be a challenge, and be patient in your interactions with them, because ultimately that's who we're here to serve, is people.
Well,